my play was Fences by August Wilson. A short bio for Wilson. He was a black American playwright, was born in 1945 and is still alive. He is the author of the Pittsburgh Cycle, which is a 10 play um, cycle that revolves around black Americans in Pittsburgh in the early 20th century, or 20th century. His work generally focuses on black experiences and gives black Americans a voice. He was heavily influenced by Malcolm X, and he had a rocky relationship with, just marriages in general. He married one Brenda Burton in 1969, converted to Islam, and they had one daughter, but they divorced in 1972. He also won a Pulitzer Prize for drama, which was significant because he was the first person from Minnesota to win that. As far as the plot goes for Fences, it revolves around Troy Maxson, who is a washed up baseball player who is a garbage collector. And the story mostly revolves around the tensions he creates with his family. So we have his wife, Rose, who is a long suffering woman and shouldn't be with him, and Corey, who is his son, who wants to play football, but thanks to Troy's own failures with sports, he doesn't want Corey to do that and fights against him all the way. The play continues, and Troy eventually ends up cheating on his wife with another woman, Alberta. Alberta gets pregnant and then dies in childbirth, and then Rose takes in the kid, and I'm pretty sure they end up getting divorced, and Troy later dies of a heart attack. And that's just the gist of it. There's a whole lot more to the story, but I have to be quick. So, what I wrote about, I didn't actually focus on like the symbolism of the name or anything. When I was reading through the play, I noticed a lot of biblical allusions and references, and so I decided to make my paper about that. And because Rex shortened the word count, I had to take out a bit of content, but so I just focused on the most interesting instances. So, first of all, Troy has a brother who was injured in World War II. He's a World War II veteran. He had a head injury and now thinks of himself as the literal archangel Gabriel. He carries around a trumpet and talks about the Judgment Day and how St. Peter is waiting for him to blow the trumpet to open the gates of heaven. Let's see. So I studied the angel Gabriel a bit, and he was God's messenger, and he influenced several important events in Christian history. And I thought it was interesting that Wilson made Gabe that angel in particular because he's such an important angel, but Gabe as a character was regarded as a liability. And for most of the play, he had free reign, but by Act 2, Scene 2, I think, Rose says or accuses Troy of signing the papers to put Gabe into a mental hospital finally. This just kind of goes to show Troy's instability and lack of control. So that was the first instance I found of a biblical allusion. And at the end of the play, Gabe is trying to blow the trumpet for Troy to open the gates to heaven and let Troy into heaven. But for whatever reason, the trumpet won't make a sound, and he ends up dancing and howling, which supposedly opens the gates of heaven. But there's also this aside that Wilson puts in, and he says, "A weight of impossible description that falls away and leaves him bare and exposed to a frightful realization. It is a trauma that a sane and normal mind would be unable to withstand." And I thought about that some, and I was trying to figure out like what he meant by it. And all I could really think was that For a second, Gabe lapsed out of this Archangel Gabriel persona back to real life and maybe had the realization that heaven doesn't exist. But he then goes on to say that the gates opened and let Troy in, and uh, so I'm not sure about that one. The next illusion that I found came with came from Troy, and he talked about having a fight with death. Now he says that he wrestled with death for 3 days and 3 nights. There's two illusions there. The first illusion is to the story in Genesis 32 from verses 22 to 32, where Jacob wrestles with God. Not for 3 days and 3 nights, though. It was just like one night. And then 3 days and 3 nights is obviously significant because, like, well, Jesus rose and all that. And 3 is obviously a significant number in the Bible anyway. So I found this mixing of illusions really interesting. And I found a book by Herbert F. Hahn. This had a bunch of stuff in it, but one of the pieces was exploring some research found by a man called Gunkel. And Gunkel's whole view was that we should interpret the Bible from the perspective that it was first started as an oral tradition, like oral stories, and only later made into a book. And so that should come into account when we're talking about it. And he says, Gunkel's view that the qualities of the Old Testament narrative were the product of the collective genius of the people rather than the achievement of individual authors reflected the influence of the sociological trend of thought and historical studies at the beginning of the 20th century. So what he's saying here is that the people are more important than the story or the literature. And this is pretty interesting because what Troy is doing is combining two biblical things and making his own story out of it. The last thing I wanted to consider revolving around this same illusion of death and God, in early drafts of Fences, Troy is battling not with death, but with Christian faith and like what he grew up with. And it was only later changed to death. So this makes me think that Wilson means not death as in something that's coming to kill you, but death as in God. God is death. And I found this interesting and maybe a little blasphemous, but it almost makes sense, at least in the terms of the story. That's essentially all I found. And in the words of Gabe Maxon, that's the way that go.